Okay, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, Hope students, visiting students from further afield, friends and visitors. It's my pleasure, in my capacity of Dean of Arts and Humanities, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this year's Gerard Manley Hopkins event. I'd normally say lecture, but our esteemed guests would prefer an interview, and we're more than happy to oblige. You'll shortly hear much more, both about and from our guests. But first, let me say that Liverpool Hope University is extremely proud to present one of the UK's and the world's best known, best-selling and most critically acclaimed crime novelists, Ian Rankin. But tonight is also a memorial event, and we're here to celebrate the life and work of Gerard Manley Hopkins, one of the greatest of the British poets, who was born in 1844, a date to remember, because it happens to be the same year that one of our constituent colleges, the Warrington Training College, was founded by the Church of England. So 2019 is therefore the 175th anniversary of this university, which we are celebrating with events such as this, but also the 175th anniversary of the poet's birth. A brief resume tells us that Hopkins moved to Liverpool towards the end of 1879, when he was 35 years old, and he stayed until the summer of 1881. He was a priest at St Francis Xavier, the church at Liverpool Hope's creative campus, where there is now a Hopkins Hall and Gardens. Hopkins lived in the presbytery at 8 Salisbury Street, between the church and the then St Francis Xavier's College, which is now the cornerstone building of Liverpool Hope University's creative campus. During his time here in Liverpool, he wrote 2 of his greatest poems, Felix Randall and Spring and Fall. He also composed music and believed he had created a new genre. Dedicating his life to serving the poor as well as the muse, Gerard Manley Hopkins died prematurely in June 1889. But his magnificent and inspiring poetry will last as long as humankind. Now I'm delighted to hand over to Dr. Paul Johnston, one of Hope's creative writers and lecturers, who is both a native of Edinburgh, where Ian Rankin's novels are based, and the writer of crime novels set there. He'll perform the role of the interrogator, and so we will be enthralled. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean. Am I audible at the back? So, okay. Firstly. So, I'm going to introduce our esteemed guest now, and bear with me, it should only take about half an hour. He was born in Fife, the so-called Kingdom of Fife. Well, it is actually a Kingdom of Fife, but it's a Kingdom of Fife inside the Kingdom of... I don't understand why Fife is a kingdom, but anyway, why is Fife a kingdom, Ian?
Well, Fife's a kingdom because the king used to live there. The king sat in Dunfermline tomb drinking the blood red wine. It's something of a very famous poem.
Yes, that is indeed true. Still don't see why...
1 point to Edinburgh University.
Yeah, right, I'm going to leave that one. So that's... he was born in a small town called Carden... I don't know if you were born there, actually. There's not a hospital there, is there? You grew up in a small town called Cardenden. Dead End, as you called it in one other interview, about 25 miles north of Edinburgh, across the water. And he was born about decades ago. He is the author, by my calculation, and I can tell you in advance that I have a grade 6 in maths, which was a pass back in the old days. 31 novels, 22 of which feature his famous detective John Rebus, Detective Inspector John Rebus, about whom he's written 31 short stories. Did you know that?
No?
31 and 31. Anyone into numerology? Creepy. Rebus, as you no doubt know, has been televised with 2 different actors playing the protagonist, though not as yet at the same time. Quite a nice idea, though, isn't it? You've also heard him on the radio, and he's been recently seen on stage. Ian's actually co-written 2 plays about Rebus, one of which, Rebus Long Shadows, I'd actually written is still on tour, but I understood this afternoon that it's just stopped being on tour. But I think it's been very successful, has it not?
It's put bums on seats and lots of take-ins at the bar, so lots of theatres are very happy.
No comment.
Yeah, the reviews were a bit sniffy, but
I saw a good review, actually.
oh, okay.
You'll pay me afterwards. Anyway, there was also a musical collaboration. Well, he did the music and you did the lyrics, or the story, with the much lamented Scottish singer Jackie Leaven. Anyone heard of him? Yeah, well played. And also you've had a more recent involvement with opera. Is that true?
I don't know if it was more recent or not. I did a 15-minute opera for a Scottish opera thing called 515, where they got 5 composers and 5 writers who'd never written opera before, paired them up, and we did 5 15-minute operas.
Well, that's an involvement with opera. How
Yeah,
recent was
yeah.
it? It was recent, was
It was, no, it must have been about 10 years ago.
Oh, right, okay, it's not recent. Sorry, I'm wrong. I accept
They didn't
that.
ask me back.
You haven't been taken down to the Royal National, whatever, yeah. Okay.
Not yet.
He's also written a graphic novel. Remind me of the title. 'Cause I forgot.
Dark Entries.
Dark Entries, and that was starring a series guy, wasn't it?
John Constantine, Hellblazer. Yeah.
Anyone familiar? Yes, I think
Yeah.
we had some yeses. Oh, well played. You've also done a non-fiction book, Rebus's Scotland, which was a lot about you rather than Rebus, obviously. Whether you and Rebus are the same, we shall talk about later on. And for many years, he was a talking head, a very good talking head, I must say, on BBC Two's Newsnight Review. Anyone see that? Anyone see Ian on that? Yes. Along with Tom Paulin. No doubt you've got many Tom Paulin stories, but we'll leave those for later. Jermaine Greer, yes.
Yeah.
As well as, but not Gerard Manley Hopkins, unfortunately.
Sorry.
No. You've also presented some programmes of your own, including, as I gather, one that's not been released yet about Muriel Spark, of whom you are a great follower, and also one called Ian Rankin's Evil Thoughts. Give us an evil thought then.
It's a shame nobody saw it. It was a 3-part documentary series on Channel 4 that it was viewed on Saturday evenings at a time when nobody was watching Channel 4 television. And it was basically 3 programmes. It was meant to be about crime and punishment. But when I started talking to the director-producer, we thought we keep coming back to much more basic questions than crime and punishment, good and evil. So we did programme 1 was, what do we mean when we use the term evil? Programme 2 was, is it nature or nurture? Where does evil come from? And programme 3 was, what do we do about it? What do we do about the problem of evil? And it was an extraordinary series to make. But they never invited me back to do another one.
Well, you probably covered every possible aspect of evil, didn't you?
We covered quite a lot. I mean, I spoke to the detective who arrested a serial killer. I spoke to a killer who was waiting to be executed in Texas. I spoke to his victim's daughter. I spoke to somebody who worked at Broadmoor Special Hospital. And possibly my favourite moment was in the Vatican when I was interviewing the chief exorcist of the Diocese of Rome, Father Gabriele Amort. Please Google him. He looks like an exorcist. And,
he's got a great name for it.
I know, Father Gabriele Amort. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, and we're yabbering away he's yabbering away in Italian with a translator because I can't speak Italian. And the crew are all hidden around behind the pews in this chapel on a misty night, Sunday night in the Vatican. And I said, how many have you done? 15,000. Can I see your waiting room? That kind of thing. But eventually I said, what happens? And he in Italian. The bag comes up onto the desk and all this gear starts coming out. And the translator says to me, it's easier if I show you. And I'm going, what? And the director's head popped up and he went, bing! And so I was duly exorcised, which didn't take long.
Yeah. Hasn't really stuck, has it?
Well, I felt great afterwards. Once they got me off the ceiling and wiped the bile off my face, I said, guys, this is just a normal Friday night out as far as I'm concerned. But no, it was kind of, and I said to him, how many times have you met the devil out of these 15,000 exorcisms? And he said 7 or 8. And he was very amenable to people actually being referred on to a psychoanalyst or a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist. But even 7 or 8 times is more times than I really want to meet the devil.
Mm. Right, well, I can see that the members of
It's going to be a cheery night tonight.
the theology and philosophy department is looking very interested at this point. You're going to be grabbed by them afterwards. So Ian has a trophy cabinet almost as large as a certain football club in this city. He's won 4 Crime Writers Association Daggers, including the much coveted diamond version. Did you actually get a diamond?
No.
Normally you get a dagger. You actually get daggers, which is quite fun going home and
There's this lovely big sort of, it's like a book made of silver, and there's a huge dagger encrusted with diamonds in the centre of it. And you get to hold it, photograph gets taken, it goes back in the vault again.
Was that right? You didn't even get it?
Yeah, no, you get a little pin badge, you get a kind of little dagger pin or something.
Oh, right.
I don't even know where mine is.
So you didn't actually get a full-on dagger that time?
No.
Because the daggers are quite
Yeah,
fun.
the gold and silver daggers that you get for the best criminal of the year are actual, used to be physical daggers. But then for health and safety reasons, they had to encase them in plastic. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. You used to get a dagger, a really good dagger.
Yeah.
And now it's encased in kind of perspex, and you can't break it open and get into it.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, I got one, and I was on the train back to Milton Keynes, where I was living at the time, with this thing in my pocket, and I thought, oh, God, if anything kicks off, I'm going to be the one that gets arrested by the British Transport Police. But anyway, there isn't a platinum one yet, but obviously, if there was, you would have won it. You haven't won the steel dagger, though, have you?
No, I don't write thrillers.
You don't write thrillers anymore. You have written.
Yeah. I used to write. The steel dagger is for people who write thrillers and spy novels, and I've not written one of those for a long time.
Ah, well, you see, there is a challenge, however. All right, not accepted, however. Right, I'll do that then, shall I? So, he's also won the USA's Prime Crime Writing Award. Like to guess what that's called? It's called the Edgar, named after. Is the correct answer. And he's also won similar awards in France. I'm not going to go through what they're called. You can't remember anyway, can you? Yeah, exactly. Well, I've got France, Germany, and Denmark. Have you got more?
Probably.
That's not really an appropriate answer, is it?
Spain. I've won the big one in Spain.
He's won the big one in Spain. That would be
I've won
the
two
Copa
Spain.
Real or something.
One of them was 100,000 euros.
Oh, right, okay, you're buying dinner. I've also said that you won the big one in Mongolia, but I think I might have made that up.
I think you made that
Yeah,
one
okay,
up.
right. He's a Deputy Lieutenant of Edinburgh. I was asking you beforehand what that meant, and actually it does mean something, doesn't it?
It's a thing where the Lord Lieutenant is the Mayor, is the Lord Provost of Edinburgh. But if he's not or she is not available and a member of royalty or some big dignitary comes to town, they've got a series of deputy lieutenants they can call on to represent the city. So you're representing the city. And you get a little kind of medal thing you have to wear around your neck, and you've got to wear a suit and stuff like that. And
So you've thrown all your suits out?
I've got one suit left, mate, just for that very occasion. And you just have to stand there while dignitary things are happening. And you've got to be it's protocol, you've got to be the first person to greet them as they arrive and the last person to see them back into the car as they leave.
Jokes allowed?
Yeah, I had a good... Princess Anne was a hoot. I said to her, I could get a cracking novel like this. She said, don't you dare.
Well, that is a challenge.
Yeah.
He's also an FRSE, I'm not telling you what that is, I'd have to kill you, an FRSL and an OBE, as well as the recipient of a sheaf of honorary degrees. His books have been published in 40 languages. I bet that's gone up since then, eh?
No, it's about that.
About
How
that?
long's this introduction,
This is
Paul?
the end. Well, you've been talking all the way through it. It's probably more than that now, because it's probably been translated into Mongolian.
It's between 35 and 40 languages.
All right, okay,
Yeah.
including Mongolian. And his latest novel is called... Well, I love audience participation. You mean you haven't read his latest novel? Do you remember what it's called?
In a House of Lies.
Is the correct answer.
Yeah.
It's called In a House of Lies. We'll have none of those tonight. Thank you very much.
Boom, boom.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a red and blue hot Liverpool hot welcome to Ian Rankin. Didn't say anything like half an hour, did it? Right, okay, I've now got my notes the wrong way around. Look, see, these are my notes.
You don't need notes.
I do if it's going to work properly. Trust me on this. Tell me about...
They're leaving already.
Tell me about Gerard Manley Hopkins in terms of your poetry writing activities.
Yeah, I did specify to Paul. I said, look, it's a Gerard Manley Hopkins event. We should talk a wee bit about poetry. And I had to remind him that I did start life as a poet. In fact, I didn't start life as a poet. I started life wanting to do comic books, but I couldn't draw. So when I was a wee kid, I used to get bits of paper and fold them in half and make these little comic books. And I would put free gifts on the front. I'd make little badges and things to try and entice the buyer. There were no buyers. There was only ever one copy of each comic hand-drawn by me. But, you know, then I got into pop music and I invented a band that existed in my head called the Amoebas. And I was the lead singer, Ian Kaput. And I would write all their lyrics. And you know, that started when I was about 12 years old. And by the time I was 17, I was still writing lyrics for the Amoebas, who then shifted from being a kind of pop group to a progressive rock band. As my musical taste had changed, so had my band's taste changed. So I was writing 24-minute concept pieces called Continuous Repercussions. I remember that one well. It only had 2 lines of lyrics, but a big long drum solo. But then at high school, I was 17, going on 18, and there was a poetry competition that had been announced nationwide, Scotland-wide, and I wrote a poem specifically for it. It had to be written in the Scots language, and it was called Euthanasia. So even at the start of my career, I was writing pretty dark stuff. Euthanasia being the mercy killing of the elderly.
Can you remember any of the lines?
Yeah, no, it was about, you know what, it was based on, you're all far too young to know this, it was based on the front cover of Jethro Tull's Aqualung.
Oh yeah,
which is like a
now
kind
you're
of
talking.
tramp on a park bench kind of figure. And so it was about a tramp on a park bench, watching some kids playing and twiddling his fingers while he's waiting for sweet death to come and take him at the end of his life. And the line I remember is something like playing with a cat's cradle called time, which was him twiddling his fingers.
What do you reckon, creative writing students?
17.
Oh,
17,
you're getting some thumbs up there.
17.
Yeah, I'll pay you
So
later.
and I won second prize in this nationwide competition.
Which was?
It was a Scots Lounge Society.
No, the prize. What was the prize?
£5.
Well, that's a lot then.
And I used that money to join the Scots Lounge Society. I thought that's the right thing to do. Stupidly.
How many LPs could you have bought?
I know, I could have spent it on Wine, Woman and Song.
At the
It
age
was
of
a postal
17.
order. I'll explain postal orders later.
No, don't.
But so by the time I got to Edinburgh University, I was a poet. You know, I was dressing in kind of crushed, you know, cord jackets and smoking a pipe, basically, thinking this is what you do if you write poetry. And no, actually what I did was a denim jacket with a packet of Galway's in the top pocket, which I didn't smoke, I just carried them around. Ridiculous. But I was writing poetry, and that's what I started off doing, and I was putting poems in for competitions and getting nowhere. And I'd go along to the Poetry Society every week, which was lots and lots of student poets. And a proper poet came along every week and talked to us, and that was the first taste I got of literature, because at Carden at Beath High School, you know, we had no access to writers. And then suddenly every week at Edinburgh, a writer would come and talk to us, and then we'd go to the pub afterwards with them and get to know them. And in fact, one of my closest friends in Edinburgh, Ron Butlin, the poet, was the first poet who came and talked to us in October 1978 when I started at Edinburgh University. And that was fantastic, and sort of, you know, I liked being around writers. And I'm very jealous of poets. I always have been jealous. I've not got the poetic sensibility. It takes me 300 or 400 pages to say what I want to say. I can't say it in anything less than that. But sometimes you read a poem and you go, I wish I could do that. I wish I could say that in a couplet, or that in a line, or that in a phrase, or that in a verse. It would take me hundreds of pages to say what you've just said. So I'm incredibly jealous of that brilliant concision that you get with great poetry. And although I don't know Gerard Manley Hopkins' work well, because we never studied it at school, we didn't study it at university, I do still read poetry occasionally, and I'm still very jealous of poets.
There's the kind of quintessence of content and form, isn't it? That everything's boiled down to sort of the smallest thing, which I think...
And we were talking earlier about Muriel Spark, who I did my PhD on, although I never finished it, because by then I was too busy writing my own books, and she started life as a poet. She always thought of herself as a poet.
She won a short story writing prize, actually, didn't
she?
She won the Observer
Short Story Company. Was her first ever published piece of work, yeah.
But she did write poetry from teenage.
Yeah, from school days. And on her gravestone, near Arezzo in Italy, she's just got Poeta.
That's right.
That's Muriel Spark, Poeta. It doesn't say novelist or anything. Just she ought to always think of herself as a poet.
Well, poeta also means creator, of course,
Yeah.
so there's that aspect to it. Let's just go back from the university situation a little bit and talk to us about what you talked a bit about. I love Ian Kaput. I'm never going to forget that. I'm going to call you that from now on, actually. IK. Talk to us about you talked about writing comics and so on, but tell us about what you were reading when you were all through your childhood and into your adolescence.
Well, I mean, I was the black sheep of the family. I was the clever one. All my parents had left school at 15. Both my older sisters had left school at 15, got jobs, and I came along and was kind of weirdly brainy and nerdy, and I loved sitting in my bedroom, drawing comics, writing comics, listening to music, writing lyrics. I was an obsessive. It wasn't enough just to read this stuff, I wanted to write it as well. Not enough just to read comics, I wanted to write them. Not enough to read lyrics, I wanted to write them. But I used to hide this very successfully from all my peers and friends, because this was a working class mining village in the early 70s. Everybody was wearing all the boys were wearing Doc Marten boots, skinheads and swedheads, having fights with the local gangs, all of that. And I would hang around the street corner. I became very successful as a kind of chameleon. I would hang around the street corner in the Doc Martens looking tough, scowling at all the passing traffic. And then if somebody said, look, we're going to go to Loch Gelly, the neighbouring village, and have a fight with their gang, had a much better name, and I say their gang were the YLM, the Young Loch Gelly Mental. Whereas we were just young YCD, Young Carden. So they'd say, we're going to go to a battle with the next village over. I would say, I've got to go home, pal. And I'd just go home and write about it. I would sit in my bedroom and write about what it might have been like to be in that fight, or to be so. My imagination was always a kind of fallback position. And growing up in a fairly staid, it wasn't so much it was a staid background, but it was kind of like a clan or a tribe. Everybody knew everybody. You couldn't have secrets in that. It was very hard to have secrets. And we had my auntie lived 2 doors away, another auntie and uncle lived over the back fence. It was just very claustrophobic. But in your bedroom, 8 foot by 8. Your imagination could soar. And I loved that. And in the local library, there were no bookshops in Carden, but there was a very small library, and I would haunt that place. And then suddenly at the age of 12, they said, here's your adult ticket. And you got this entree to this world of books that you weren't supposed to have access to. I couldn't go to the cinema and see the films. You had to be 18 to see The Godfather. You had to be 18.
15, I was 15 when I sneaked in.
Yeah, but you had to be 18, it was an X. You had to be 18
broke
to
the
see French Connection, The Exorcist, Clockwork Orange, all of these films. But nobody stopped me reading the books or getting the books from the library, so books were like forbidden fruit. They were exciting. I remember Clockwork Orange getting passed around to school. It was a sort of forbidden text. And we'd all
it became a forbidden film as well, because in Edinburgh they banned it.
No, I mean in the UK. They didn't ban it. Kubrick withdrew it.
No, but in Edinburgh, the Edinburgh City Council actually banned it.
Oh, they actually banned it. They banned Life of Brian as well.
For slightly different reasons.
Yeah.
People weren't dressing up in Brian costumes and beating people up, which was the problem.
That's true. But it was that thing about, there weren't many books in the house. My dad probably read 1 book a year during the summer holiday. My mum probably didn't read much more than that. But I had an uncle who was in the newspaper business in a kind of very small way, and he said to my parents, it doesn't matter what Ian's reading as long as he's reading. So, cartoons were fair game, comics were fair game.
Do you agree with that, actually?
Yeah, I do. And I still read comics at the age of 58, and I still get a lot out of them. As narrative, as a way of telling a story, I think they're fantastic. And as escapism, they're fantastic, but they can also take on quite big moral themes and quite big moral questions. They can do everything a novel can do. So, I was reading all the time, and the library was my saviour. And then he opened up a bookshop in Kirkcaldy, which was 6-7 miles away by bus, and I would, go down there and buy. I mean, there was a books programme on TV, I seem to remember, a paperback writer. Yeah, and I'd watch that, and they'd say, oh, Solzhenitsyn. And I would go down to this bookshop in Kirkcaldy and say, have you got any books by this guy, Solzhenitsyn? Yeah, we've got the Gulag Archipelago, Volume 2. I go, okay, I'll have that. And I was trying to read the Gulag Archipelago, Volume 2, when I was like 14, 15. It was ridiculous. And
they didn't have One Life in the Day of Ivan Denisovich, which is A, shorter, and B, much more straightforward.
Volume 2. Spoiler alerts, what happens in Volume 1. But no, I just, it was ridiculous. I was trying to read these books that I wasn't clever enough to be reading at that time, but I didn't let it put me off. I was trying to read everything. I was reading Dante's Inferno or trying to. But then American books grabbed me. It was things like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest grabbed me. Catch-22, which we studied in high school when I was 17, really grabbed me. And even things like The Godfather, I just loved the storytelling, the big family saga. And so when I got to uni, I was studying American literature. That became my kind of undergraduate specialism, was American literature, and I just loved it. And I think Rebus owes quite a lot to the American school of crime fiction, more so than the British or English school.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a bit later on, exactly where Rebus is to be located between Private Eye and Cop and so on. But Stephen King famously said, as my creative writing students know, that you can't be a reader unless you can't be a writer unless you are a reader. I presume you go along with that. You've continued to be a reader all the time you've been writing, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are writers out there who don't read very much and who are still quite successful. But I just always enjoyed reading. I think you read differently when you're a published novelist, because I always try and read the book as a reader first, and then if I've really thought it's an interest in terms of technique and everything else, as well as being a great story, I'll go back and read it as a novelist. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, one recent example would be something like Gone Girl. I just wanted to know how she did what she did. How did the novelist do that? How did they put it together? How did they structure it? And use all these unreliable narrators and everything else. So I read it first as a novel, as a reader, then went back and read it as a novelist, picking it apart. But I'd like to lose myself in a book. And in the few instances when I've tried teaching creative writing, I was visiting a professor at East Anglia a couple of years ago. Whenever I did one-on-one tutorials, I would always say, look, try and pretend you're not in an academic environment. Don't treat it as an academic exercise. Try and rediscover the you who was a child just enchanted by stories. Try and get that part of yourself back again, because that's the fun of being a writer, is being a child who never really grows up, still playing with your imaginary friends, still playing role-playing games, and getting to play God at the same time. This childlike wonder, but also this extraordinary sense of power, where you've got the power of life and death over your characters. And in real life is messy and confusing, and we don't always make sense of it, and it doesn't always come to a complete or a happy ending. But in fiction, when you're controlling the plot and the characters, that's an amazingly powerful and therapeutic thing, I think. And I can't imagine why you would want to do anything else. But I think to do it well, you've really got to have read quite a lot of books and found out how other people approach the world, and how other people approach storytelling.
Because, of course, everyone reads the same text in different ways as well, so it's not something that someone else can tell you. You have to work it out for yourself.
Absolutely. And everybody, of course, everybody in this room would also write a different... If I gave you a setup, you would all write a very different piece of work. If I gave you the first sentence of a story, you would all write different stories. If I gave you a character, you would all have different journeys for that character. Mm-hmm. I think that's an extraordinary thing. I think it's the most extraordinary thing in the world, that with 26 letters of the alphabet, everybody in this room can write a sentence that's never been written before. Isn't that incredible? Mm-hmm. You think 26 letters of the alphabet? It's like musical notes, and people keep writing new tunes all the time with a limited number of notes. And I think it's an amazing thing that the human mind can create these worlds.
Absolutely. You mentioned before that you felt that you behaved like you were a chameleon. Do you, just expanding that a bit, do you think that's something that writers all have to do to some extent, sort of blend into the background and eavesdrop and whatever else you might be doing as a chameleon?
Well, I mean, Muriel Spark says that writers loiter with intent, which is almost a criminal act. And we are sort of studying situations and studying people that we meet or that we almost meet, and we're thinking, are they useful to me? Can I use this situation? Can I use that line I just overheard in a bar or in a cafe? What are those two people talking about? Are they in a relationship? Are they splitting up? Are they having an affair? You know, who is she? Who is he? Why is he wearing that ridiculous jacket? All these things, we're there. But if people spot you, they become self-conscious. So that's where the chameleon comes in. It's nice to be able to blend into the background, and that means that you can spy on people much more easily. And I think that is part of it. And also a kind of Jekyll and Hyde thing. I think that I think I channel a lot of stuff into my stories that if I didn't channel them into my stories would make me a much more screwed up individual than I am. And I think that's certainly true of crime writers. When you meet crime writers, they're lovely, well-balanced people because we channel all that dark stuff onto the page. And thank God we do. I had a friend who was a crime writer, and she was a also a sports journalist in Canada, and her boyfriend broke up with her, and he was quite a famous baseball player. And she wrote to all her crime writing friends around the world and said, put this guy in your next book and if something horrible happened to him. And, then she waited 2 years, because it took us 2 years to get our next books and get them written. And then she sent him a huge big box of books with post-it notes in the pages where he was garroted and had broken bottles stuck up his fundament. I was actually quite generous. I made him a gorilla with impotency at Edinburgh Zoo.
Literally, a gorilla.
Yeah.
That was remarkably kind of you.
I
Really.
know. I thought so, in retrospect.
So moving on from the chameleon thing and onto another aspect of writing that's often talked about, which is the idea of being on the sort of border, on the edge, liminality in academic terms. So the detective, whether it's a private eye or an inspector, and Rebus is somewhere between the two, as I've said, and the author also have to have one foot in society in order to understand what's going on, but also have one foot outside to be objective to some degree about it. Would you agree?
Yeah, probably. I mean, oh man, it's a big question. It's a big question. I mean, you've got that initial thing about who do you write about? Do you want to write about a private detective or a police detective or an amateur? Someone who just happens to get involved in a crime. And I just, I'd never really got on with the Agatha Christie idea that a little old lady or a Belgian gentleman would be invited into a crime scene. I don't know why I keep doing that. Would be invited into a crime scene. So I thought I've got to write about a cop. I mean, cops are the people who arrive at crime scenes and they're there to investigate crimes, not spinsters and titled gentlemen called Lord Peter Wimsey. And I just thought that
anything DL Sayers fans in the audience?
Yeah,
Oh,
but
right,
that
okay, you're in
world didn't make sense to me in 1980s Edinburgh.
Probably did in 1920, to be fair.
Possibly. But I was much more interested in, or much more attracted to the American hard-boiled school of kind of urban crime writing with these tortured souls of detectives. And Rebus, I think, is much more in the vein or the tradition of the American private eye. I mean, he doesn't really operate, he couldn't survive in the real world of policing. He would have been kicked out many years before, because he doesn't operate well as part of a team. You've got to operate as a part of a team. You've got to be able to be a small player in a very big mechanism, and he doesn't like that. He likes to be off on his own, doing his own thing.
He's not very keen on bureaucracy either, is
He's
he?
not at all. But so he is, to that extent, he is an outsider. He's definitely an outsider looking in. And he's also not born and bred Edinburgh, so he's an outsider looking in Edinburgh, as am I. Didn't grow up there, so I was
going to ask, actually, is that an advantage, you think?
I don't know if it's an advantage or not, but I always think I don't really understand Edinburgh. Maybe if I'd been born and grown up there, I would understand it a bit more, but maybe not, I don't know. But the books I started off writing the books to try and make sense of Edinburgh per se. And I thought, and also to talk about society, to talk about issues in society. And I thought a cop's a good way of doing that, because a cop's got access to the haves and the have-nots in a way that is realistic. And the only other character I could think who could do that for me would be a journalist, who could be interviewing the politicians and the CEOs one minute and the dispossessed the next. So Rebus, although he was only ever meant to be around for one book, I thought was a useful tool to get into that, to get a bit deeper into the city, using the city as a microcosm for Scotland as a whole, and maybe using Scotland for a microcosm for the UK and further afield. And I thought if I ever get a theme I want to write about that can't be contained in this city with this character, then I'll go and write those books. But as long as the things I want to say and the things I want to explore can be contained in that world, I'll keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he just stuck around. He stuck around much, much longer than he was meant to. He just refuses to go. It's really weird.
Do you think that actually, because I always say to my students, when people say, oh, the character ran away with me, you hear authors saying that, and you're almost suggesting it's more than that the character sort of is, well, I mean, this goes back to what you're saying about tortured souls, because that may come out of the American noir tradition, but it also comes very much out of the Scottish literary tradition, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking for influences in my books, you don't look to the British crime novel. You might not even look to the American crime novel, because I didn't really read crime fiction before I started writing the Rebus books. You would look to Jekyll and Hyde and Justified Sinner and Muriel Spark. You would look at the Scots Gothic. You would look at the Caledonian anti-syzygy. A word I can spell, but I'm not exactly sure what it means.
I knew what it meant.
We parse it as meaning sort of being where extremes meet, which is a line from Hugh McDermott, the poet. It's that split personality, or that doppelganger thing that you get in Jekyll and Hyde, and you get in James Hogg's Confessions of a Justified Sinner, and you get it in a lot of other
And why do you think that is
places as well.
So why is there a Caledonian anti-Semitism?
There
isn't one in England, as far as I'm aware.
There is this weird disassociation between the heart and the head. That you get the Scots are very hot-tempered, hot-blooded people, but also can be very calm and rational. And these can be contained in the same person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Stevenson, I tell this story a lot because I like it a lot, and I think it explains a lot about why I started writing these books. Robert Louis Stevenson, as a child, was quite sickly. His nursemaid, Cummy, would tell him the story of the wardrobe in his bedroom, which is now in the Writers' Museum in Edinburgh. You can go and see it. The wardrobe in his bedroom had been made by a guy called William Brodie. Deacon William Brodie, Deacon of Rights. He was a carpenter, a woodworker. He was a gentleman, a man about town. But by night he had a gang, and he would break into your house and steal your valuables. And it was easy for him to break in because often he had fitted the locks. And he was eventually captured and hanged on a scaffold that apparently he had built or helped to build as a carpenter. So Stevenson is being told the story in a fevered state as a kid of this guy who's both good and evil, contained in the same person. And of course, many years later, he goes on to write Jekyll and Hyde. And then Muriel Spark writes Miss Jean Brodie, the Prime Miss Jean Brodie. Miss Jean Brodie tells us in that book that she's descended from a gentleman called William Brodie. She does not tell her girls what Brodie did. She just mentions him in passing. But so studying Muriel Spark for my PhD took me back to Jekyll and Jekyll and Hyde took me back to good and evil. And this notion of people hiding their true selves behind a kind of mask that they present to the world.
Yes, which in Scottish history, without going on too much about Scottish history and culture and so on, is probably related to the religion, isn't it? The strict Calvinism.
Almost certainly, and this kind of idea that you can let yourself go at certain times of the year or certain times of the week, but other times of the week you padlock up the playground. In the Western Isles of Scotland, they still padlock the seesaw and the swing on a Sunday, so kids can't play. It's an extraordinary thing, but in some cultures they still do it. There is that. And like Edinburgh seems a very bridled place.
It certainly was when I grew up there.
Yeah, but then the Edinburgh Festival arrives in August, and suddenly you're allowed to kind of become unbridled for a few weeks of the year and then go back to being bridled again.
Well, because there is that. Oops, that was good. That's that unusual noise. That was your armpit, I think. So body is important in crime writing. In all writing, isn't it? Creative writing seasons. So, yes, this kind of idea of tortured souls seems to be, yes, potentially American, potentially Scottish, potentially, I don't know, whatever else. I'm sure it exists in the English literary tradition as well. But there's also this sort of drive for justice as well. So, that's the other side of Rebus. So he is a tortured soul, but he wants to see right being done, particularly by the victims, isn't it? In proper, I've gone now. In proper kind of hard-boiled style, he's the avenging angel or whatever. He's the, what is it? The down these mean streets a man must walk. Raymond Chandler said it. Chandler had a proper English education at a posh private school in London. He was versed in Malory's Morte d'Arthur and all the rest of it. He had Tarnished Knights and Damsel in Distress and Dragons in all his books. And the Tarnished Knight is a private detective. The Damsel in Distress in the first book especially is being blackmailed by gangsters. That's the dragon right there. And Chandler was actually going to call Marlowe, his detective, Mallory. At the beginning of his writing career, because he was influenced so much by the tales of King Arthur, and saw him very much as this kind of down these mean streets a man must walk. And that was almost a reaction to the British or the English school of crime fiction at that time, which was very polite and very, very bloodless and middle class, it seemed to him. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is that he then chose the name Marlowe, which presumably takes you back to Christopher Marlowe, who was a much more problematic person.
Yeah,
than,
you get back to Marlowe, that's true. It's an interesting point about Chandler being educated. If he hadn't been educated in England at the time when he went to the same school as P.G. Wodehouse at about the same time. He might have become a very different kind of writer. But there was a lot of, I don't know, the Scottish stuff. There is this tradition in Scotland of this dark Gothic psychological novel. Mm-hmm. And I think that was where the Rebus books came from, if they came from anywhere. They came from me doing my PhD on Muriel Spark, her books on the surface are very light and witty and glittering, but just below the surface is a lot of darkness. A lot, and she was very influenced by the Border Ballads, which in themselves have got a lot of darkness in them. And that's the other thing, is that Scottish literature down the ages allows for the supernatural. It allows for elements of the supernatural. And although I don't do that in my books, whenever you talk about good and evil, you often come back to that notion of people being possessed. When I speak to people in prisons who murderers and that, that cliche comes up again and again. The red mist descended. I felt possessed. I felt like I was floating above myself, looking down as I committed this crime. It wasn't really me. It was someone else. I was taken over by a malign spirit. All this stuff keeps coming through. And when you look at why people commit crime, and especially commit murder, it comes back to the 7 deadly sins a lot of the time. So crime fiction is dealing with some very old, big moral questions that have enthralled us and made us inquisitive forever. And that, that question, why do we human beings keep doing terrible things? It's a really easy question to ask, and it's an almost impossible question to answer.
Right.
Is your mic working again?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
You've dreamed, Paul.
Yep, what's that?
Personal. Brian?
You've got mic droop, that's what you've got.
I've never been so... that's better. Hold on, I'll just move my chair. Now you can hear me, can't you? Yes. Right. Let's just move away from all that, because it's very interesting. I'm sure we'll come back to it later. I'm sure the audience may want to test you further on that. But since we've got quite a lot of creative writing students and possibly people in general who are interested in how one goes about writing a novel, should we look at some of the practicalities for a bit?
I might not be your man for that, but go on.
You've only written 22 novels.
Yeah, but I don't know how I do it.
Yeah, right, okay. Well, all right, if you say that, give me the same answer 3 times, I'll move on, all right?
Okay.
Well, here's an easy one. How do you start a novel?
Well, it can start from any number of places. Usually it's panic. Let's use the latest book as an example. The latest book, In a House of Lies. January last year, all I had was a June deadline for a new book.
The virtues of deadlines,
Yeah,
students.
that was all I had. So this is where the panic comes in. So I went on holiday with my wife, and thankfully she took ill. So she was in bed for quite a few days of the holiday, and I just sat there mulling over what this next book could be. And I'd taken my folder with me of clippings from newspapers and magazines, ideas written on beer mats, character names, puns, you name it. Just a whole slew of stuff that comes at me or comes into my mind during the year. And I just got it out, and it was one little clipping from Private Eye, the magazine Private Eye, and it was about a private detective who 30 years ago had been found murdered in a pub car park in London. He'd been investigating alleged links between...
Oh yeah, I remember that story, yeah.
Yeah, between organised crime and senior police officers, and I just went, interesting, put that in that pile. And the image came to me of some kids in the woods finding an old rusty car in a gully, opening it up, and in the boot there is a desiccated body of this private detective who'd been missing for 10 years. That was it. So that was the opening, and then I had 5 months to write the book, and so I got back to Edinburgh beginning of February, and I just opened up my laptop and I started writing, and I had almost no plan of where this book was going to go. I didn't know who killed this guy, why he died. I sort of vaguely knew what he was investigating before he was killed. At the start, here's an interesting thing. We talked about this earlier, about stories and where you can go with them. When I wrote the opening scene, which is these 10-year-old kids finding a body, I thought this could be Stand By Me, this could be the kids' story. Then I thought, nah, I don't need the kids. It's a murder inquiry, because the guy obviously didn't die natural causes, so it's a Siobhan Clarke, who's my detective, story. It's a story for her. Then I thought, oh wait a minute though, he went missing 10 years ago. Rebus was a cop back then, it would have been a missing person case back then, Rebus might have been involved in it. Oh, hang on, suddenly it's becoming a Rebus novel. You're dripping again, I love that.
I'll just leave it there.
So it just naturally became a Rebus novel, but at the start, on page 1, it could have been many, many things. It could have been many different kinds of book. And I write the first draft really quickly. I wrote the first 100 pages in 10 days, so that's about a third of the book. In 10 days, 10 pages a day, because it's just basically it's the spine. Does this spine of the story work? Is it worth me writing this book? Is there somewhere for it to go after this? and by the 100 pages I know if it's working or not, and hopefully it's taken me in some interesting directions. I don't know where it's going to go, I don't know how it's going to end, but is it an interesting place for me to be? So it's rough when I write the first draft. Nobody ever sees my first drafts, but within 6 weeks I had the first draft, 300 pages. And then I polished it, did a second draft. Then I go and do the research. So the research is done between first draft and second draft. That speeds things up a lot, because by then you know what you need to know, not what you might need to know. That's a lesson I've learned from experience. Once I had a haemophiliac hitman in one of my books, and I spent months researching haemophilia. I needed half a page, which now these days you can get from Wikipedia. Was in the days before the internet. But you know, I wasted a lot of time. I knew a lot about haemophilia, but I wasted a lot of time. So I do the research, and then I do a second draft, which fixes all the problems in the first draft. And by then the characters hopefully are taking on some life. They're not just ciphers. They've actually got lives of their own. And then I show it to my wife. I print it off and show it to my wife, and she goes through it with a pencil. And she tells me everything that's wrong with it. And then I do a third draft, and it goes to the publisher. So by June, the publisher's got a book.
And I remember in the past, you used to get quite a lot of pages, even sort of 30 pages of notes from your editor. Does that still happen, or?
Yeah, I used to get emails from. I used to live in France, and I get these long faxes back in the day from my editor saying, "Great book, loved it. Just got a few comments," and then a 30-page fax would arrive with detailed notes. This one got a fair bit. My editor. Actually, this was unusual, because my editor now hasn't been very hands-on, but he came back to me and he said, I think it needs more pace and tension and sense of danger. And I said, where? He said, everywhere. And so I went, really? Are you sure? But I think he was just showing off, because he was about to leave and become an agent, and he was showing off to his replacement, this is what an editor does. Because he'd never been that detailed. To
a massive name author. Look at the iniquities of the publishing industry.
I was talking to J.K. Rowling a wee while ago about one of her Cormoran Strike books, and she still gets long editorial notes on her books. You know, I thought, well, just tell them to F off. They're going to publish it.
Yeah, but you didn't tell your guy to F off.
We had an argument. We had a long conversation about how, because I said that will make it a different book. Is it making it a better book, or is it just making it a different book? Mm-hmm. It needs to be a better book if I'm going to do this work. And so I did some of the work he wanted me to do, but by no means all of it. The person I fear is my wife. I mean, if she thinks it's okay, it's okay. I don't care what my editor says. But I made a mistake 3 books ago. Top tip for anybody who wants to write books. 3 books ago, I gave Rebus a dog. Don't do that. If you've got a series character, do not give them encumbrances. Because the next book after that, I was 100 pages in, and I went downstairs for dinner, and my wife said, "Oh, by the way, how's Rebus's dog going?" I'd done 100 pages, having forgotten it, and now had a dog.
What is the name of the dog?
Brillo.
Oh yes, I remember that.
Brillo,
I do remember.
dog.
What happened to Brillo?
He's in the new one as well.
He is in the new one.
Yeah. Because my wife kept saying in the new one, in the margins,
yeah, he is, yeah.
Shouldn't Rebus be feeding the dog about it? If he's going to this part of town to interview someone, couldn't you take the dog with him for a walk?
Some terrible gender stereotyping going on here.
So just lose the pets, no pets. And once you've introduced a pet, by the way, you can't kill them.
That's true.
Readers do not like it.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. No, I've had that. If you kill a dog or a cat, you'll get much more than killing a human being.
You can kill as many human beings as you like, but do not kill a pet.
Yeah.
So I made a rod for my own back. So don't give in. And also I've given him this disease, COPD, which used to be called emphysema. So again, every book I've got to think, okay, he's a year on from that, how is he coping? And in fact, I phoned up a friend of mine who's got another writer who's got COPD, who had talked to when I gave Rebus this condition originally, and I said, look, Rebus has had this for a year or two now, how's he doing? He said, is he still living in Arden Street in Edinburgh? I went, yeah. He said, up 2 flights of stairs. I went, yeah. He said, he's fucked. He's going to be looking for a bungalow or a ground floor flat. He's not going to want to climb 2 flights of stairs.
So you're moving him then?
No, but in this book, it's him thinking he's going to have to come to terms with this at some point. Yeah.
Right. So actually you answered about 3 of my next questions there. So you don't do any planning. You're what the Americans in a rather revolting word call a pantser. You fly by the seat of your pants. I hate that phrase.
More crime writers do that than you might imagine.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If you don't know it, many crime writers, people think it's almost retrofitted. A crime novel is like a puzzle. So it must be like a crossword. You must start at the end with who done it and then work backwards.
You've lost your mic.
I've lost my mic again. What's happening here?
There you go.
You must have to work backwards from the kind of the solution, but most of us don't. Most of us just make up as we go along.
Yeah.
And the book tells me where it wants to go. The story tells me who might have done it, which is why the first draft I don't know who done it until I get to near the end.
Whoops. Yeah.
It's only when I get near the end that no, it just keeps coming out for some reason. Yeah, give him my. We can
Mine
share a
doesn't
mic.
work.
We can share a mic. No, I don't know until I'm about 2/3 of the way through the book who did it and why. Because I know as little as my detective at the start.
Yes, you're on the shoulder of the detective, so you can't know more. That makes sense, I suppose. So would you? I mean, what you're not saying, of course, is that that was the 22nd book in the series, right? And you've already got the main character. You've already got all his sort of surrounding circle of friends, and not so many friends, it has to be said, but helpers and all the rest of it. You've also got an ongoing series villain, Cafferty. So actually, talk a bit about how you came to Rebus when you first created him way back in Nuts and Crosses was the first novel.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote the first Rebus book when I was at uni, supposedly doing my PhD on Muriel Spark. 3 years of funding, I wrote 3 novels. The first one was never published, but the second and third were, and the third one was the first Rebus book, Nuts and Crosses. I didn't know anything about the guy, I didn't know anything about detective fiction, I didn't read detective fiction, I didn't know what I was doing really.
Closer.
I know, well, it's not closer, man.
No,
It's
further
just
away
closer.
then. Anything you like.
It's just cutting out for no reason whatsoever.
Help.
Maybe it's batteries, who knows?
No, you're on again.
I know I'm again. Paul, I sing in a band, man. I know what I'm doing.
Yes. Tell them who you sing in a band with.
Who do I sing in a band?
Who's in your band?
Who's my band? 2 journalists.
Oh, you're not going to tell us who they are. Okay, fair enough.
Well, no, I mean, they're not famous. 2 journalists, J.K. Rowling's husband, who's a doctor, and a professor at a university in London now, he's just moved, of psychology.
J.K. Rowling's husband, that's what I was getting
Yeah,
at.
no, he's just left for another band.
Oh, really? Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry to intrude in your grief.
Yeah, no, so I did this novel with this guy Rebus, and he was only meant to be in 1 book. I didn't think it was the start of a series. I didn't think that I was going to be a crime writer. I killed him off at the end of the first draft of Nuts and Crosses. And you know, I don't know, he stuck around.
You did have gaps, didn't you, between...
Yeah, I mean, I wrote thrillers and things,
yeah.
and I mean, I wrote other books in between. But I just liked him. I liked him as a character, and I thought he's a really useful way of looking at the world, of looking at Edinburgh and looking at society.
Which does raise this question about duality, doesn't it? The extent to which, is Rebus your other darker half or
he
something?
He probably is my other darker half, and then Cafferty, the gangster who runs Edinburgh, is his other darker half.
When it goes on forever, kind of.
Yeah. And then the younger gangster is Cafferty's darker half, and so it goes. But it's almost like, it's like the Rebus and Cafferty cannot imagine the world without each of them, So they are kind of like Jekyll and Hyde. They are kind of Cain and Abel, except one of them did bump the other one off. But again, I never know when I start a book if they're going to kill each other or become best friends. I never know how that relationship's going to go.
So you don't plan... So looking back at the series, once the series got seriously going after about, say, the 4th, when you were doing that's about when you started doing regular Rebus books, wasn't it? You were never thinking ahead. Because I've been catching up with Line of Fire because I was about to do a new series, and I've actually met Jed Mercurio a few times, the guy who writes the script, and it's incredible how he's worked things out kind of in advance. So it seems, at least, unless he's been retrofitting it all the way through. It would be interesting to know that. So you did the exact opposite. You didn't have any planning as you went through the series as to what would happen down the line.
No, absolutely not. No, they can hear me. That's fine. Fucking roadies.
Do I get the other privileges of roadies then?
Roadies get no privileges. Honestly, it's been hit and miss, and things like characters I've really got to like, and in a novel said you don't need him anymore. Like there was a priest in some of the early books, and readers would sit and have these lovely theological, philosophical conversations with the priest about evil, the nature of evil and everything else. And then the book said to me, he's got to die. And I went, what? He said, yeah, he's gone. He's fallen over that thing there. He's died, smashed his head up and died. I went, no. Oh, I liked him. And it's just getting weird. The books are much more cynical than I am. And much more venal than I am, I think. They just go, we don't need to. There was a guy who was an MSP, a member of the Scottish Parliament, and I liked him a lot. And he was going to be in 3 books.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
He was dead 50 pages into the book.
Yeah, you just killed him off, didn't you?
I didn't kill him off, the book killed him off. I didn't kill him off. You know, the book said, we don't need this guy, he's extraneous, just get rid of him.
Well, he was an MSP, so...
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah. It'd be hard to make 3 novels out of a member of the Scottish Parliament, really.
No, it would have been fine. I could have done it.
But you just said he didn't.
I didn't. I know. And you know, as we sit here, I've got to write another book between now and next summer, and I've got nothing. I've got no ideas. I don't know what I'm going to do next. Is that a Rebus book? I don't know. Have I got any ideas left in me? I'm not absolutely sure. I've got some short stories I've got to write for, you know, various commissions. And that's maybe a way of warming up. I think short stories, I love writing short stories.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that.
I wish I could make a living from writing short stories.
You think being a kind of all-rounder in terms of writing, so writing the odd review, writing, you know, this, that and the next thing, is a good way of keeping your eye in?
Yeah, it's a good way. You're stretching yourself. I mean, I like it when someone gives me a new challenge. So the opera was short opera was a challenge. The graphic novel was a challenge. I like it, you know, song lyrics and things. Yeah, just stretching the muscles, using different muscles. I think a different way of telling a story, a different way of looking at the world and presenting the world, all of that's good. But at the end of the day, I usually come back to Rebus, you know. I mean, after all these lovely adventures, doing other things, I almost always come back to this dour Presbyterian Scot and his dark worldview, and sitting in his wee bar in Edinburgh in a dark lane with the rain drumming outside, and...
very unlike his creator.
He's totally unlike his creator, right?
He uses the same bar that he drinks in
well,
the
I only go to the Oxford bar to pick up mail, as you well know.
Yes.
People send me mail from all over the world to the Oxford bar.
Yes, when we go there, we just look at your mail. We don't drink it.
We just look at my mail. But I get here. Look, that's the thing as well. How much do you use the real world? Do you want to use the real world?
Very good question. In fact, that's on my list. So answer that question.
Well, I'm doing all your work for you now.
Yeah.
Again, when I started writing about Edinburgh, I thought, I've got to write about fictitious Edinburgh. You can't write about the real city. This is fiction I'm writing. So Rebus drank in fictitious bars. He worked in a fictitious police station. I invented fictitious parts of town. I didn't name the pub he drank in normally. I didn't name the street he lived in. But people in Edinburgh said that's obviously that police station, that's obviously that part of town. I thought, well, then I should use the real Edinburgh as much as possible. And then you get that suspension of disbelief. The reader goes, oh, hang on a minute, that's a real place, or that really happened. Like the G8 summit really happened. They start to believe the fiction that you spin around all that. So I do set the books now as far as possible in a real city in real time. And again, that's also problematic because the city keeps changing and Rebus keeps getting older. And so there are things he can't do now that he did before. The whole structure of the police in Scotland has changed. I've got to take that on board.
Police Scotland, that's working well,
my
isn't
God,
it?
it's a pain. And, you know, all of this stuff keeps changing. But the good news is that keeps the series fresh and it keeps me on my toes. I can't get blasé, I can't get bored because this stuff's changing all the time. So, you know, given Rebus COPD has made me rethink him as a character. Okay, how's he feeling now? What's he feel about this? What's he doing? You know, what can't he do that he could do 2 or 3 books ago?
He had to give up smoking, didn't he?
He's given up smoking. He's almost given up drinking. He's given up smoking. His girlfriend has got him trying to listen to Brian Eno.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. She's got him into mindfulness.
Well, Roxy really music, working. Yes. Brian Eno.
No, she's got mindfulness, man. Ambient music to try and get him relaxed. It's not really working. Okay. It's not really working. He's trying his best. He can't give up the booze either. He's trying his best, but he hasn't given up the cigarettes. I did sell my shares in British American Tobacco before I took them off the fags. But setting them in a real pub I thought was quite a coup in a way because that did become... People could come to Edinburgh and actually do the Rebus tour.
And they do.
They do.
Thousands,
they do. Yeah, they can go and see his police station. They can go and visit the street he lives on. There is a guy, Rebus Tours, it's a real walking tour. And the guy
do you get anything out of that? Have you demanded a percentage?
No, I get nothing.
You could have, couldn't you?
No, I don't want
just
that.
A decent chap.
I'm just happy for him to do it. But it's fun, I think, that people think that makes it more real. But then, of course, things happen like the American editions. Now, the American edition of Flesh Market Close, which is a real street in central Edinburgh, they changed to Flesh Market Alley because Americans wouldn't know what a close is. So then American fans come to Edinburgh looking for Flesh Market Alley. They don't find it. They get annoyed with me. Why did you change it? I don't know.
Well, they stop you in the street and
Well,
like,
no, they write to me, or they write to me at the Oxford Bar and say, why is Flesh Market Alley, Flesh Market close and stuff. So there's that kind of slightly frustrating thing, although nothing is quite as frustrating as a recent brilliant French translation of a recent book, where if they don't understand a cultural nuance or reference in French, they do a wee footnote. So they leave it in English, footnote, and explain it in French at the bottom of the page. And Rebus is saying to somebody, I get the feeling we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. I would have thought that's a line from a fairly well-known film, The Wizard of Oz, right? Footnote. Go down to the bottom. In French it says, Rebus here is referring to the two American AOR bands, Kansas and Toto. Which, when you go back, makes no sense at all. It doesn't make any sense in the context whatsoever. And also, Rebus would not listen.
But you wouldn't. But that's your fault for having so many musical references in the books. I mean, the titles are. I was going to ask you about titles. So, when do you come to titles? Because actually, a lot of your books' titles do have music references, particularly to the Rolling Stones.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the title comes first. It might not end up being the final.
So you do
title.
need a title.
I need a title before I start writing. But for example, Dark Entries, which was my graphic novel, I used that as a Rebus title in about 3 books, and my publisher always turned it down. Said you can't call it Dark Entries.
Not surprised.
It's too dark.
Oh,
so
right.
then when I wrote
something else.
So then when I wrote, it's a song by Bauhaus. But then when I wrote a graphic novel, they thought Dark Entries was a great title for it, so I got away with it. But yeah, often song titles because I'm a frustrated rock star. I'd much rather be a rock star than a writer. I'm just not the ability, and because there's so much music in the books, musicians have become fans of the books, which has introduced me to the world of musicians and music, and I've been able to work with them. Jackie Leaven and I made an album together, toured together. Van Morrison asked me if I would do the introduction to his collected lyrics, which I did. Stuff like that. I've met all the Rolling Stones at one time or another. So
What's Brian Jones?
Yeah, okay, all the extant Rolling Stones. Not the Fifer. Which one came from Fife?
Ronnie Wood? Don't know.
Ian Stewart.
Oh, cool.
Ignoramus. He was born in Pittenweem. He was an original Rolling Stone man. He was a keyboard player.
But he was banned by what's his name for being too ugly.
Didn't win right. Yeah. What were you asking about? Titles, right? So I get the title first. I need the title, and the title usually is also thematically relevant. The title is the theme, so it's a clue to what this book might be about. Rather be the devil. That notion that there's a bit of the devil in all of us, and sometimes it's more fun to be devilish than to be good. Even Dogs in the Wild is a song by the Associates, and it was to do with how we human beings sometimes treat our kids worse than animals do with their offspring.
What about Saints of the Shadow Bible? How do we get a theme from that?
That's a line I didn't understand from a Jackie Leaven song, and he died before I could ask him what it meant.
It is explained in the book, isn't it? Because you have this.
The Shadow Bible is a kind of
bunch of guys.
They're a kind of bunch of cops who are a wee bit out of control, but they've got their own kind of laws, and they call it the Shadow Bible. So it's almost like the Bible, but it's their Bible. It's their kind of way of doing things, their laws, their mores, and they're called the Saints. I mean, that was just me having a bit of fun thinking, what could this possibly refer to? Never got the chance to ask him what it actually meant.
It's a shame, isn't it? Yeah. Right, I'm going to ask Ian one more question, and then it's going to be your opportunity. So get your thinking caps on. So my question, my final question, unless everyone chickens out and I have to go into my reserve questions, which of course are utterly fascinating, but let's hope we don't have to go there. You talked about the American crime fiction sort of background. We talked obviously about the Scottish side of it as well, but a lot of American crime fiction is written in first person. Did it ever occur to you to write Rebus from the first person point of view?
Yeah, about halfway through the series, or maybe not quite halfway, I was going to take. It was weird. I'd started writing the book, and I would be maybe 50, 60, 70 pages in, and I would look, and I'd actually moved from writing in the third to writing in the first person. Mm-hmm. You know, I was so much inside his head that I'd started writing it in the first person, or the book had started off in the third, and I thought maybe I should write the whole book in the first person. William McIlvanney, a really great Scottish novelist who died a few years ago, had written 3 novels with a detective in Glasgow called Laidlaw. First 2 books are in the third person. The third book, final book in the series, written in the first person. I thought, if I do this, he'll think I'm ripping him off. So I wrote to Willie McIlvanney in Glasgow, never having met him, and said, look, would you be, actually I'd met him once, but he didn't really know who I was. Would you be okay with me doing this? Would you, I'd like to do it, but, And he never wrote back, so I never did it. And then years later, when I met him again, I said, I'm so sorry. He said, I never got round to answering that letter of yours. And if he had, maybe I would have taken the Rebus books into the first
I can't
person.
imagine if he'd got around to answering it, he'd have had a problem, because he was a famously...
I don't think he would have had a problem.
Famously nice guy.
No, but
wasn't
I didn't do it because I never heard back, I think. And I wanted to sort of get permission almost to do it.
But
it would be very limiting. I think
I mean, that's the traditional objection to the first person voice, isn't it? But I mean, now that Rebus is getting on, and things are getting a bit dodgy with his medical condition and all the rest of it, would it not be interesting to have a kind of retrospective view of his career? I'm giving you free ideas here.
Yeah, cheers, mate.
You will be paying me.
I mean, I do think that the books are almost written in a kind of first person. It's like a weird third person, first person. So we're inside his head, but it's in the third person. We're seeing the world through his eyes, and you do get his reactions to things, almost as though he's speaking to you, just from his way of talking or his mannerism or whatever. You get a sense of how he's feeling about the situation. So it's almost in the first person, but I've never quite gotten the whole hog. I mean, maybe I'd do it in a short story or something.
Have you written short stories in the first person? I'm trying to remember.
I've done short stories in the first
Probably
person,
haven't,
but probably not a Rebus one yet. But I can see it happening. I mean, almost in the play you can do that. In a stage play, you can have the actor go up and talk to the room in a way that you don't really get in the novel. And we haven't done it. I say we because I co-write these plays. We haven't done it yet, but it's there at the back of our minds that we might do another play. Yeah, well, it's a soliloquy. Just you can, yeah, kind of. I mean, I don't know who you're talking to when you stand in front of a stage and talk, but yeah. I mean, who knows? Who knows?
Another challenge, writing challenge to keep the muscles.
Well, one of my favourite Scottish novels of all time is called The Sound of My Voice by Ron Butlin, who I spoke about earlier, the poet who's still a good friend of mine, and it's written in the second person. Now that's a challenge for you.
Which I think I've told all the students never to do that apart from a short story, but yeah, that's a whole novel. What's it called?
Well, it's about 130 pages. It's not a long novel. It's called The Sound of My Voice. And basically he's an alcoholic working, I mean, he's a business person, but he's also an alcoholic. And it's basically his alcoholism talking to him.
Interesting. A bit like Irvin Welsh's tapeworm. Yeah. If you haven't read the novel Filth, if you want to find out about what tapeworms think, feel free. Not very nice, is it? Not very nice. Right, okay. I'm done. You're on. Hands up, please. Oh, we've got one right at the front. Hello, Kath. Hello. You know how to handle a microphone much better than either of us, so feel free.
I wanted to talk about class and writing, because there's a lot of discourse at the moment about working class people and difficulty getting into publishing, and there was a massive kick-off in Twitter, and I can't remember what genre writer it was, and they were talking about how genre writers, especially crime writers, have been from working class backgrounds and talked about working class issues for a long, long time. And it was the people were on the council, no, we didn't mean you. So it was almost as if, there was a conversation about working class writers, that working class writers weren't involved or weren't welcome. So I wonder what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, there was a thing a while ago. There was an article in the Guardian or something saying where have all the working class writers gone? And I quite glibly said on Twitter they're all in the top 10 bestseller list if you go look for them. But writing commercial fiction, I mean, most of the crime writers I know come from a working class background or just one.
Certainly in the top 10, yeah, that's absolutely true.
I think so. And also, as you say, writing about working class experience. I mean, the thing about cops is they tend to, well, maybe not so much now because a lot of them are college educated, but if you go back a generation, they were mostly from working class backgrounds. And the people they were dealing with were predominantly from working class backgrounds, so it was a working class literature. It was an urban, a literature of urban experience. And if you're looking at the problems we have in society, a lot of those problems are happening to working class people. And the crime novel in England recently has taken on austerity, and it's taken on migration and xenophobia, and what poverty and unemployment do to people, what desperation does to people, what drugs do to communities. If you're looking to explore any of these themes as a reader or as a writer, crime fiction is a good way to do it, I think. And a lot of the writers who come to the genre seem to come to it from a working class background. And, partly maybe there's been a slight snobbery in the past about not taking genre fiction seriously in academia, but that's all changing now because better and better young writers are coming into the genre, or coming into genres per se. You know, whether
Influence.
it's fantasy, historical, whatever it is, and they're bringing a literary sensibility with them. They're trying to do new things. They're trying to reimagine the crime novel. So I was just talking to Paul earlier. There are now crime novels that are pretending to be podcasts. So they're almost in the shape of podcasts, true crime podcasts, but they're actually novels. So they're looking at the world around them and they're mimicking that world and taking inspiration from that world, and dealing with, you know, the experiences and the issues that are around us every day. And that's partly why I like it. If I want to know about any culture in the world, any culture, any country in the world, I'll go to the crime fiction set there. You'll get a sense of the people, the problems they've got, the social issues, the geography, the climate.
Actually, a good example
all
of that
that.
recently has
Go
been
on.
South African crime writing, which there was amazingly, because South Africa, only South Africans here, but obviously South Africa was a very kind of violent society. And then in the last 10 years or so, there's been a real explosion of South African crime writing, and it's totally fascinating because you find out incredible amounts of stuff.
And
I mean, I dare say you can go and read histories of South Africa, but you know, it's not quite the same thing somehow, is it?
Yeah, and I mean, that's another thing, is that if you've got cultures where there is a lot of violence, you often don't need crime fiction. Crime fiction comes along afterwards to explain what just happened. So in Northern Ireland, there was almost no crime fiction during the Troubles. As soon as the Troubles finished, there was, an explosion of really good Irish crime writers explaining what just happened, or trying to explain what just happened and why it happened. So that's when crime fiction tends to come along. And there's really interesting things happening just now in India, with crime novels about street people, about kids being taken off the streets and sold into slavery or sold into begging, sold into the sex industry. And so all around the world, the crime novel is moving into quite difficult territory, big moral questions, big moral territory. And I love that. And, you know, it can be serious. It can be serious as you like. It can be as light and frothy as you like. It's a very Catholic church, a very broad church. You can have books that are funny and witty and charming, and you can have books that are harrowing and will stay with you forever. And it's all containable in this one genre.
Yeah, you can have crimes solved by cats.
You can have knitting crimes. There's crimes with knitting patterns.
Has
There's crimes
anyone
with,
read a cat mystery?
Yeah, cat mysteries. There's loads of them in
Seriously?
America. Yeah, cat solving crimes. Even Patricia Cornwell has a cat solving crime mystery. Not one of her case Carpetas, but it's not, anyway, one of her books.
Seriously?
Yeah.
What, a serious book?
No, it's not that serious.
No, but I mean, because he's famous, he doesn't have a sense of humour, but, okay, let's leave that one.
Yeah,
Right, okay.
I'll lend it to you, mate.
Another
Maybe the
question.
only person who bought it.
Okay, let's move up gradually to...
We've got another mic up here, haven't we? We've got a mic up
we
this
have
side
actually,
as well.
yes. Actually, we'll come to you in a second, Paul, but let's go up there as well. Any hands up there?
Yeah.
Ooh, one of my students, excellent.
Just wanted to ask, when you sit down to write your novels, do you always start with page one, or do you ever start do you ever jump into the middle, or do you ever start with the end?
I'm linear. I'm a linear thinker. I always start at page one, and not everybody's like that. I remember once talking to P.D. James, and famously she jumped around all over the place. She would say, "Oh, today I'll write chapter 43, and tomorrow I'll write chapter 20," and she would just put it together later on. I thought that was an extraordinary way to work. I just could not imagine jumping around like that and then putting it all together. No, it's definitely linear for me, because as I say at the beginning, I don't know what the hell's going on. So I need to write it in linear fashion to work out what the hell's going on, where the story's going to go. So I can't jump to near the end because I don't know what's going to happen near the end until I get there. But it's, there's no rule, there's no kind of hard and fast rule for how you write any of this stuff.
No rules in creative writing, eh?
No, I mean, James Elroy has a 200-300 page synopsis before he begins. I've got maybe a 2-page synopsis before I begin.
What's his name? Jeff Deaver has a 60,000 word synopsis, which just basically means he just adds
Print the book, just print it.
adjectives.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the point?
Yeah, I know.
Great. Okay, Paul here.
Thank you. How does the skill set differ between, for example, when you're writing a collection of short stories and maybe a thriller, or even a crime novel? Are you using different tools as a writer and perhaps refining them in different ways? How does that work?
As a general rule, the thriller has a lot more detail In a crime novel, someone can have a gun. In a thriller, you've got to explain what kind of gun it is, what kind of bullets it takes, what the
Otherwise, you
velocity
definitely
is,
get letters, don't
it's
you?
like, yeah, it's kind of like a pornography of detail that people want who read these thrillers. The crime novel can be a bit more kind of blurred about what, you know, I mean, people in my books tend to use hammers and things rather than guns. Not many guns in my books. In general, how do you approach it? I don't know. I mean, the way I approach it wouldn't be the way anybody else approaches it. Writing a short story, it's all about the twist at the end. If you're doing a crime short story, it's a twist. It's what you want. You want to pull the rug out from under the reader at the end of 10 or 12 pages. That's quite fun. And they can be written quite quickly, which I enjoy.
Without much planning again.
Well, it's a bit, not too much. I mean, I'm just about to start writing a short story. There's not been an awful lot of planning so far.
Well, you've got the train trip back tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't know. Go on.
Can I just come back in?
Yeah.
Is that more difficult for you to do? I mean, you were saying before that you found poetry, that editing down, that concise focus, very, very difficult to achieve. Is that more difficult than a short story?
I mean, it's different. I mean, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but that is part of the fun of being a writer is rising to the challenge. Just recently, I was approached by Radio 3 to do a follow-up to Lord of the Flies. Now, you only had to do the opening chapter of the follow-on book. So what they'd said to a number of writers was, look, is there a book where you've got to the end and thought, I wonder what happened next? And I thought, yeah, Lord of the Flies. I remember reading it at school and thinking, shit, what happened to those kids when they got back to civilization? So they said, right, do that. So I had to write the first chapter of the follow-up novel to Lord of the Flies by William Golding. And I decided I would try and do it in Golding's voice as far as possible, the voice he used in that book. And again, when I had two ideas. One of them was, right, the next book follows on minutes later. So they're on the ship being taken away from the island and they're still feral. And then also, oh no, it's years later and they've dissipated. What happened to them in those lives? And they come back together again for some reason. And I discussed it with the editor and she said, oh, I prefer the latter, let's go for the latter. So I had to sit down and write that. And the challenge there was getting Golding's voice as much as was possible. Because he had a different voice in every book. It wasn't the same, never used the same voice twice, I don't think. Same approach. But that was really quite fun to do that, to do that active mimicry.
It didn't end up being a whole novel?
No, it ended up being about 6 pages.
Oh, right, okay.
It just had to be the opening chapter of the next book.
So what's going to happen to it?
Oh, I'm not telling you that.
Oh, right. All right, okay. Well, that's a very interesting project. Look,
I know.
We found a secret out.
Right,
Up there, yes.
Loads.
Let's go to, at the top, we'll come to you in a minute, and I haven't forgotten you, so give that to
Anybody?
Emma. That's Emma up there. Hello, Emma.
Hi, so you said, hello, okay, yeah. You said you met all these people, whether it was a daughter of a victim or someone on death row. Do you think that was fundamental to you being able to write such successful novels? And for young writers, would you say that it's beneficial that we experience what we write?
I mean, I don't think you don't need to have been a murderer to write about murderers. And you don't...
Yes, you do.
No, you don't. And you don't need to have met a murderer to write about murderers. You don't need to have travelled into the future to write science fiction. You don't need to be living in the past to write historical fiction. You just use your imagination. When I wrote the first Rebus novel, I knew almost no police officers. I'd never been involved in crime. I just thought, what's it like to be in that situation? And in fact, the police is like working for any organisation. It could be a university, it could be in a factory, it could be an office. You find office politics are pretty much the same wherever you go in the world. So it's just empathy. It's just thinking yourself into these people's heads and how they would be thinking or acting in any situation. And sometimes you get it wrong, sometimes you get it right. The more you do it, the better you get. It was useful to me about probably 4 or 5 books into the series when a cop introduced himself to me in Edinburgh. He was a fan of the books. And he said, Ian, you make quite a few procedural mistakes. And he then became a really good source of information to me. And by then, the books had ceased to be a paid hobby and become a full-time job for me. So it was probably right that I did some work to get the details of these people's jobs right that I was writing about. So that was useful at that point. But I do think that you don't, the research shouldn't get in the way. If you think, I need to go and, how can I write about death row in America if I've never visited death row? Just do it. And 99% of the people you're writing for will never have been to death row either. As long as you can convince them, then you've done your job.
Thank you. This gentleman down here. Come to you in a minute.
I really have two questions. I'll try and make them.
Yeah, stick them together.
I think Black and Blue was the first big success, but I actually thought Stripjack was a better book than any of the previous ones. And one of the things that made it interesting, this is when I'm trying to bind the two questions together, is there's this passage towards the end of Stripjack where something in the writing just goes up, like however many gears, where you just describe your MP has now been stripped to like a creature who's about to leap to his death. And the writing just goes, in several of your books, it goes from being a procedural book to something like, there's poetry for half a page. And I wondered, does the editor usually chuck that out? Because
Clearly not in those cases.
And like, every second book there's like a piece of like, it's not poetry, but it's a much more ambitious kind of writing than so the question is, how do you get to the good detective novels? And do you do those bits of super writing consciously, or you try to cut them usually?
I think the first Rebus novel, Noughts and Crosses, was very flowery. It was written by a creative writer. It wasn't written by a creative writing student, because I wasn't a creative writing student, but it was written by a student who was in love with words and wanted to show off words. There's a sentence in Noughts and Crosses, or a phrase, the manumission of dreams. I've got no idea what that means. I must just want to use the word manumission in any way, shape or form I could. And that takes me back to when I was at school. And at school we used to do a short story every week in English. You do a short story, and I remember one time writing a short story about a guy, you think he's the President of the United States, but he's actually in an asylum. If only. And and I called it Paradox. And my English teacher said, why'd you call it Paradox? I said, it's just a great word. He said, you know what it means? I went, no, I've got no idea. He said, we've got to look it up. I'm just totally in love with words, you know. I used to read the dictionary for fun and write lists of great words at the back. I've still
Are you
got
paying
the list somewhere.
attention, students?
Yeah, I know. I used to do that. But I think, you know, there are times when, you know, I think the kinds of novels I write work best when they're quite simple and straightforward. I've always got to make sure that, especially for inside Rebus's head, it's not getting too poetical. Again, in the early books, he quotes from Walt Whitman. He should not know Walt Whitman, the American poet. He should never have read any Walt Whitman. He says, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. No, that's me, that's not you, John. So I've always got to be very careful that it's him. And I think sometimes, you know, you get too much of me, or you get bits of me poking through. And I try not to let that happen in the later books. So I don't want that to happen. I want it to be his story, not mine. And I do enjoy it when crime writers do produce great poetry in their books. Some do. James Sallis, the American writer, who is also a poet, happens to write, I think, very poetic crime novels. William McIlvanney wrote poetry as well as prose, and his crime novels can be quite poetical at times as well. He was also into philosophy, and his detectives reads philosophy for fun.
Note, philosophers in the audience. Read McIlvanney.
Read
Everyone read McIlvanney.
Yeah. So I mean, that's not maybe not quite answered your question, but there were times when I could have become a different kind of writer, and I chose to be the writer I am now rather than that other writer.
Interesting. Right, there's a gentleman
Somebody's
in the
got a
middle.
mic. Somebody's got a mic up
this
there.
gentleman with a black T-shirt there. And someone's got a mic.
I thought somebody had been given a mic.
This gentleman here has had his hand up a lot, so who's got a mic?
This guy at the back's got the mic.
Well, you can keep it for the time being. But he's not next, because this gentleman's had his hand up a lot. I'm in charge here.
Okay, this is a bit maybe linked to the duality sort of thing. So growing up, you were sat in your house feeling not a part of this community, so you escaped through writing comics. And you placed your main character you've written through in a city that you weren't part of. Were you ever tempted to reverse that and send Rebus back to your village that you grew up in, to give him the dislocation you felt, and to see how his life would feel, and him being dislocated, remember it into the community?
I've done it a couple of times. One of the early books, he goes back to Carden Den, he meets a girl that he used to know at high school, he realises that his language has changed, she talks in a slightly different vernacular to him. Was it the Black Book? Was it Mortal Causes? I think it was Mortal Causes. And then in a later one, Dead Souls, he's trying to
Definitely
find the
not the end
missing
as well,
son of an
yeah.
old girlfriend who's from Cardenden. So again, he goes back to Cardenden, and his ex-girlfriend is now married to somebody else. So I've used it a couple of times, and I mean, I go back very occasionally, usually for funerals, to Cardenden.
Or to name the street that was named after you.
Yeah, Ian Rankin Court. I've not been back for a while since I named Ian Rankin Court. But I don't go back very often, but I do have that dislocation when I go back. I mean, I'm not the guy I was when I was 16, 17, thinking this is my world. You know, Cardenden was my world. My parents didn't own a car, so getting out of Cardenden was always pretty difficult. If you went to a gig in Edinburgh, you had to miss the encore to get the last train back. So yeah, I do go back occasionally, and so does he. His daughter now lives way up in the north coast of Scotland, and I'm thinking of taking him way up there, because I think that would be dislocative in the best sense of the word.
No hill walking there with COPD. Eh?
Right. Just add one thing there, because the thing about this cultural thing, about this dark culture, I think the Scottish culture might be more similar to Scandinavian
Yeah.
culture.
Entirely like that.
Scandinavian crime fiction.
Oh, Scottish crime fiction is often compared with Scandinavian crime fiction. Yeah.
So we were there first.
The long dark nights of the soul and everything else. Yeah. The one thing the Scandinavians have done is they have married that kind of darkness and that dark psychological stuff to Hollywood aesthetic. So they've got big action-packed scenes and stuff, and rococo serial killers running around making snowmen and stuff like that. You know, if you want to be a successful serial killer, do not leave a snowman at the scene of each killing.
Oh, that's right.
Because people soon realise what's going on.
That was one of Joe Nesbo's, wasn't it? Yeah. Right. Okay, we're actually hit 7:30. Nick, you've got the mic up there, yes? All right, use it, but it needs to be a quick question, and then we're done.
You're right. As young writers that are yet to be published, what's the best advice the younger generation, in line with writing about any genre, are being true to their beliefs?
Things have moved so much in publishing since I started out. I mean, you've got all these new ways of getting published. You can self-publish online. You can sell your stuff direct to Amazon as an ebook and never go near a traditional publisher, an editor, or an agent. So there's a lot more. In some ways, it's easier than ever before to get published, but it's harder than ever before to get noticed. And if you spend all your time self-promoting or trying to self-promote because you've got no publisher or no editor doing it for you, you've got no time to write. So you've got to balance it. It's a balancing act. I was asked years ago, a lot of writers were asked years ago, a lot of successful writers were asked years ago to give their top 10 tips, and The Guardian published them. Go on the Guardian website and just put my name in, you'll probably find them. I mean, number 1 was get lucky. And number 10 was stay lucky. And in between were things like read a lot, write a lot, take criticism, learn what criticism isn't useful.
Take criticism.
Showing your work to a stranger is the biggest step you'll ever take, I think. You know, actually showing it to somebody and then getting feedback on it is completely nerve-wracking, and always will remain nerve-wracking, no matter how successful you get. When your book or your story goes out into the wild, it's an absolutely terrifying thing. It's like sending your kid off to school on the first day. You know, are they going to come back happy?
But I was going to say, they don't come back for their vacations, they do the books.
Well, are they going to come back happy or not, or crying? So yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, crime novel, if the story you want to tell, if the things you want to say about the world or things you want to explore about the world can be contained in crime fiction, this is a pretty good time to be doing it. Because there are more publishers than ever looking for crime fiction and looking for young voices, looking for different cultures, looking for voices from different cultures.
Diversity has really kicked off in crime fiction, isn't it?
It really has. And different cultures, different voices. It's all out there, and there's a ready market, and there's publishers drooling, waiting. So maybe don't think about going the self-publishing route. Maybe try the traditional publishers such as exist, or small publishers, small independent publishers. Again, there's a lot of them, and they are sharp and they are hungry. So and how you get to know them? You look online. You get the Writers and Artists Yearbook. I mean, all the things that people used to do. Writers and Artists Yearbook still exists as far as I know, and lists every publisher, every agent in the UK, what they specialise in, what they're looking for, stuff like that. A lot of them are on Twitter. Go on Twitter. The publishers will be there. The editors are there.
Yeah, following agents and editors.
If you can find editors and agents on Twitter, just follow them, chat to them. I shouldn't tell you this, but I've just got a guy a book deal with an agent I know, and he was just somebody who said to me, he said, "Will you read my book?" And I said, "Well, I'll look at an excerpt." And he said, and it's a crime novel, and he said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, it could do a bit of work, but there's a new agent on the block. Maybe he'll take a look." And the guy's just done a deal. And I know people who started off doing ebooks and they've become successful as ebook writers, and because of that, traditional publishers have come looking for them, and they're now getting, you know, old-fashioned publishing deals on paper, which I think is, you know, still my preference. I still want to read a book on paper. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. Can't read a book on my phone. Can't read a book on my phone. I want to turn the pages. While I'm listening to my vinyl. While I'm listening to my vinyl.
Right, I'm afraid we've gone past our time. I know some of you wanted to ask questions. We will be around very briefly, but other than that, I'm afraid I have to wind things up, and I have to say, on your behalf, many thanks to Ian Rankin.